The anger toward government is palpable and real. The determination to rid Washington of incumbents from both parties who voted for the Patriot Acts, for TARP, and for the other bailouts is fervent. But the most interesting phenomenon I've discovered recently is a passion by ordinary folks for the Constitution and for an overriding interest in understanding just where the government's powers come from. These are serious-minded folks. They will withhold votes from the big government Republicans because they want to shrink the federal government no matter who is running it. In a recent New York Times article, the Tea Party's biggest star, former Sheriff Richard Mack of Phoenix, Arizona, partly credited his appearance on Freedom Watch with launching his career as a darling of the Tea Party lecture circuit. I think it's his ideas and his values that make him a darling. What makes Sheriff Mack different from any other law enforcement official throughout the country? Let's see. He took an oath not to violate the U.S. Constitution, and thousands of other local law enforcement folks have joined him. Why are the feds upset about that? Joining me now is Sheriff Richard Mack. Sheriff, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Well, thanks for having me again, Judge, and I appreciate that. One minor correction. Joe Arpaio is from Phoenix. I'm from Safford, Arizona.
Okay, all right. We correct that, from Safford, Arizona.
Yep.
And thanks for the shout-out in the New York Times. You've been all over the country since last you were on the show with us, explaining the Constitution, demonstrating that even those in law enforcement who at times have been notorious for cutting corners in the Constitution don't have to do so. What resistance do you meet, if any, when you make those arguments?
Well, not very much, actually. I've been speaking to sheriffs and peace officers, chiefs of police, constables, and I've been surprised by the reaction. Most of them agree and believe that it's time to get back to our constitutional basics. And where we're having problems is, though, who is actually in charge of resisting the breadth and scope and the overreaching of the federal government. My question to you and everybody else, who is to determine how far the federal government can go? The federal government?
Unfortunately, the federal government has become the judge of its own powers. And
I know.
You know your history. Madison and Jefferson, even Hamilton, who was the father of big government, said, when the federal government decides what the limits of its own powers are, there will simply be no limits. That's the importance of, most respectfully, the Tea Party movement, you, the independents that you have gathered to say to the federal government, here's a line, thou shalt not pass.
Well, that's exactly it. And I believe that the ultimate line in the sand that you're alluding to is the county sheriff. And I believe that the oath of office, as you mentioned, if we will follow, adhere to, and obey our oath of office to uphold and defend the United States Constitution, all of these other problems are going to be resolved. And it will be the sheriff and the sheriffs across this country standing as an army to protect their citizens against the incursions of the federal government. And that word was used by Justice Scalia, your friend and mine, who wrote the decision in the Mack Prince case. He said it is absolutely the job and responsibility of local officials and state officials to protect us from the incursions of the federal government. Well, don't you wish your state legislature knew that?
Oh, boy. Listen, you know that I come from New Jersey and still live in New Jersey. We are the most overregulated, overtaxed state in the union, although we have a great new governor who shares a lot of the views that you and I do. We'll see what he can do up against a Democratic legislature.
State sovereignty, quite honestly, Judge, is our only hope left. If you think that Washington, D.C. is going to all of a sudden stop its own tyranny, I just don't believe that's going to happen. I wish it was.
Well, when I was at the Conservative Political Action Conference last week, I don't know if the tide has turned, Sheriff Mack, or if it's just fashionable, but I saw and heard the crowds roar when the Patriot Act was attacked, when George W. Bush's big government so-called compassionate conservatism was attacked. And as you know, Ron Paul won fully 1/3 of those who voted in the straw poll there. That would have been unthinkable while Bush was president.
It would have been unthinkable just a year and a half ago. And now this Tea Party movement, and I believe this Tea Party movement is about exactly what you said. In the last week, I've been to 4 different Tea Parties. In the last year, I've done probably 30, 40, 50 of them. And the common denominator in every one of them is the people want to get back to the Constitution, and they demand the officials in this country, the very politicians who promise to uphold and defend the Constitution, stop being the ones that are destroying it.
And why do you, me and others who take an oath to not to violate the Constitution, meaning to disobey an unlawful order, which is the moral thing to do? Aquinas said you have a duty to disobey an unlawful law. Why is it that you meet with resistance from the establishment? Do they, even some people not very far from where I am now, think that just because it's top down, just because it's the federal government, that the feds are always right?
Well, the federal government isn't the top down, and the 13 original colonies, or the 13 original states, formed the federal government, not the other way around. It was formed with very discrete and enumerated and limited powers. It was never formed to be our boss. And the Tea Party movement is really hell-bent on making sure that the federal government knows and understands its own limitations and realizes, and this is the big shock, Judge, that the federal government is not the boss of the states.
You know, I am privileged to speak at many of these gatherings, as are you. And the two biggest applause lines I get, one of them you just said, that the states created the federal government, not the other way around, and consent given can be taken back. When I say that, the crowd goes wild. The other thing that drives the crowd wild is that without a Second Amendment, there wouldn't be a First. And the Second Amendment guarantees the natural right to defend yourself against anybody, even against the government, if it's taken over by tyrants. And that drives the crowd wild. Now, I don't say these things just for the emotional response. I say them because I believe they are accurate representations of our natural rights and our Constitution. And people like you are spreading that message.
Well, you're right, and the big applause I always get is when I say the President of the United States, and I don't care who it is, from George Washington to Barack Obama, I don't care. The President of the United States has no authority or jurisdictional power to tell your sheriff what to do.
Wow. You and I have talked on air and off about some of the practical things that local law enforcement can do. Do you see it coming that before the feds can indict somebody, or before the feds can serve a subpoena, or before the feds can arrest somebody, they have to let the local sheriff know, just to make sure there is no abuse of the constitutional liberties of the person that they're pursuing? Do you see that happening, Sheriff Mack?
I certainly see that hurting no one, except maybe the pride of the federal government. And we tried to get that passed with Helen Chenoweth back in the mid-'90s. And I've actually talked to Ron Paul about it as well. It's just a valuable check and balance that will help the people, and it will prevent the abuse of the federal government when they come in and don't have their homework done properly. Absolutely, yeah, it's a protection, and they should already be doing that, and the federal agents should want to do that, just to make sure that they're not violating anybody's rights. It's a good check and balance. Before
I let you go, and just to talk about politics for a minute, there's a very hot primary going on in Texas, not far from where you are. How's my friend Deborah Medina doing against Governor Perry and Senator Hutchison?
Well, I was just with Deborah Sunday. I went out there to do a fundraiser and a rally for her. There were hundreds of people there, a huge crowd. And I'm telling everybody in Texas, I'm making calls myself. The primary is 1 week from today, Judge. And this lady has pulled off a miracle. She really has a tremendous spirit about her. She believes in state sovereignty. She believes in the Constitution. And I've always said, Judge, if you have somebody running for governor that can say Constitution without choking, for God's sakes, vote for that person.
I think she's going to overtake Senator Hutchison, and I think there's going to be a runoff with the governor, and what a battle that will be.
It will.
Sheriff Richard Mack, one of the great defenders of human liberty in all the land. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us again on Freedom Watch.
I'll see you soon. In fact, I think I'll see you in Ohio pretty soon.
Be my pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Judge.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/Freedom Watch and on Sirius 145 XM 168 or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.